this process, this design process that we'll get into in the next handful of weeks. How do we fit to this place? What's our climate? Well, we're a very, very cold place. It's like a little bit depressing when you look around the world and see where people live. We're one of the coldest places people actually live across the face of the planet. There's some other areas that are as cold. There's not many that are colder. This is a few years ago. I'm not standing on my knees here. This is just a whole lot of snow after the Valentine's Day storm. And that same winter, it got to be negative 24 where I live. Pretty extreme as far as what kinds of life forces, what kinds of organisms can exist in these systems. It's still, an abundance of organisms. It's pretty amazing, but a lot less than in warmer places. So that's a fact of the conditions we have to deal with when we think about settling this place. We need a lot of heat here, right? We're in a storage climate. We need to get all of our resources in a small amount of time. Right? We can generate from, let's say, May to around this time of year really easily. If you've ever anyone kept a garden here, you can make more food than you can eat in a short period of time. The challenge is really how do you extend that harvest across, the 7, 8 other months of the year that we hopefully plan to occupy this place. So that's why I like to think of this as a storage climate, because we're dormant. Our energy flow is dormant for more of the year than it's not. That also has its advantages. It's good for controlling pests. It's good for breaking disease cycles and building soil. It's really, really good for building soil as well. So we have some social conditions that we've inherited as well as climate conditions. What might this be? It's around here. We see a lot of these driving around Vermont. Yeah, a dairy farm. This is how they look now. There's some new silos in this one, but this is the house, right? Boarded up house. So it's a hobbling along type of situation. We're now, at the end of, not the end, but we're in kind of the wane of the dairy era. We're for the first time below 1,000 dairy farms, which was the predominant agricultural use for this part of the world for about 100 years or a little more. So unfortunately, this is becoming challenging, and I know many of you are aware of the challenges we face land use-wise in this part of the world, but just to touch on it briefly, we only have about 10 to 15% of our land base as agricultural soil. And this is how we're treating it, right? We have a fossil fuel-based agricultural industry where we have to bring the nutrients back on to the land from which we harvested, and we do so at great expense and great cost, with fossil fuels at every turn. And of course, beating up the soil, not accruing value, but extracting value each time we do it, right? This is a good way, really good way to compact your soil. Drive on it with trucks loaded with liquid, right? That's pretty heavy. So we're not really building value in this way. It's more of a mining process than a farming process. So we know that can't last for very long. Bare soil agricultures haven't lasted ever for very long. The Fertile Crescent used to actually be fertile. We all know of it as a vast desert where some of the most unstable forms of politics in the world and forms of society exist now. Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, the Middle East. That used to be one of the most fertile parts of the world, and we made it into a desert with wheat in pretty short order. So we're doing that right now in Vermont with our annual agriculture, and we've already done it in the Midwest, but it continues to hobble along because we keep feeding it a lot of inputs. So we're propping it up with the liquid fuels that we have. Now, luckily, we're really lucky. As Bill McKibben, I think, has pointed this out, we cut down all our forests in Vermont, right, or 85%, give or take, of all this land was cleared, not very long ago, just a handful of human generations ago. It all regrew into forest. Why is that? Most of the world, if you just go cut down all your forests, what are you left with? A desert. Yeah, that's how you make a desert. Just start cutting down all your trees. So here we've been lucky. They all grew back? No one planted them, right? What happened? Why did they grow back? What are some of the factors that allowed forests to just regrow in this part of the world? Our climate, right? And especially what parts of our climate? The water, right? We happen to get a very constant amount of rainfall, precipitation, throughout the whole year, 4 to 6 inches, give or take, every month of the year, pretty much without fail. You know, sometimes it'll vary month to month, but on average, it's incredibly consistent. So we live in a really important term here. We live in a very non-brittle climate. Alan Savory uses the term, he divides climates into brittle versus non-brittle. It's a really important way to look at a place and understand how to adapt to a place. We are about as non-brittle as it gets. Maybe the UK might be a little less brittle. It just mists, you know, multiple times a week for a lot of the year. That's really great. That's just like a, you know, if you've ever worked in a greenhouse, that's a greenhouse environment, right? It's just misting on your seed bed, and things are just growing. Here, you know, trees will grow out of rocks. We're just constantly accruing organic matter. So things will regrow. So we're very non-brittle. Now, if you look around, as I've started to do in the last handful of years, traveling around to different parts of the world that have a similar climate to us, not the same, we see actually some pretty alarming things going on from land use there, and their climate to being just slightly different. Where might this be, and what's going on in this photo? Any people that have taken landscape natural history or Walt Pullman's class and reading the landscape, what's happening in these two slides? What's the land use here, or some of the land uses, and where might they be? It's all detective work, right, when you're traveling and trying to learn about what's going on in a place. I'll give you some hints. This is probably being hayed. Yeah, it almost looks like it. This is actually Iceland. And so knowing that it's Iceland, what do you think is happening on this slope most of the time? Erosion, but why? They have a climate that this would normally be really, really green, except for, what are these farms doing? Why is this all eroding? Look at that erosion there, here. Why is this bare? And this is all erosion in here.
Because there's no wind rate?
Yep, there's a lot of wind operating in this climate for sure, but what else? What are they farming? Iceland. Sheep, right? Just like we did in Vermont. So two of the primary places I visited actually are still way into sheep, which we were in Vermont. Anyone heard of the sheep craze that we had here? That's a big reason we cleared a lot of our land. But they still got water flowing in their rivers, right? But there's a lot of value lost here, right? I mean, where's the value happening in this photo? Look on these two photos. It's down low, right? Yeah, everything's basically settled down. It's just like Vermont. We're just lost most of our soil, and it's now down in the lowlands. Down here, there's very little productivity. There's almost none up here, right? A little bit maybe up here where it's lower angle. And same here, maybe a little bit around this farmstead. Now, this is New Zealand. Same land use pattern, but a little more forgiving climate. So they still have a lot of green here. But we could see what's going on. I was amazed. I thought when I went to New Zealand, I would see all this just really progressive, large-scale grazing and land use, all this soil building happening, great things for us to do in Vermont. And I was actually really very unimpressed and shocked at what I saw. For the most part, I saw some really small-scale, great examples of value creation, of regeneration, but a lot of entropy. So clear cutting, they're still on their second or third cycle of clear cutting their forests, which are all a monoculture of Pinus radiata. This is really one pine tree for the most part up on these slopes. And they're in their pretty much second to third clearing. Like it's like a farm cycle, like it's wheat. But they wait 20 to 30 years, clear it all. What are they left with here? Bare soil and logging roads. What happens to slopes like that? Right? So you can't do this too many times before those trees aren't going to grow back up again. And then down on the flats, they graze really heavily there. You can see this looks pretty dry, right? Pretty arid. This is actually their spring. So this is late winter in Vermont, so it's their spring. That looks pretty dry, doesn't it? Look at this drainage. Totally bone dry. This is their spring. So this is the beginning of creating a desert. And this is what it looks like before it's on its way to being a desert. So we can look around the world and we can see where we've already basically destroyed. Fertile Crescent, Greece, all around Rome, you know, all these major empires desertified their lands, a lot of Africa. And when you look at places like New Zealand, that's becoming a desert pretty quickly, even though most of us wouldn't think, oh, New Zealand's becoming a desert. It really is. And then when you look at a place like Vermont, that's really hasn't shown any signs of becoming a desert, but we're doing a lot of land uses that if our climate shifts, will become will cause desertification to happen. You can think of regenerative land use as the opposite of desertification, right? If desertification is all the way at one extreme, we're trying to do the opposite. And what's that rooted in? What's the primary process that's maybe the opposite or one of them of desertification? What are we doing? What's happening ecologically in the land if we're moving away from creating a desert? What are we? We're retaining nutrients, right? Absolutely. And water. And what's happening on the ground? We're building soil, exactly, right? Because that's the mantle of living medium that covers the planet, is soil. So we're building that. And here we're not building soil. What's happening here? We've taken the soil off. The soil's long gone here, and now we're trying to get it. The resources below the soil, very deep down in the earth, in the kind of end of the oil age here. What do people think? Yeah, it's not mountaintop removal, although it looks kind of like that. It's happening it's probably happening at a bigger scale. Where are we going to get the oil from now that we've tapped out most of its liquid forms? We're now going to wring it from rocks. Tar sands, right? Alberta's just the beginning. Tar sands underlie a large part of the western part of this continent. So, important piece of context here, the rate of change is fast. If we've already seen a lot of climate changes, as some have pointed out, climate change is just beginning, right? Because we're just starting to do this. This is much more destructive to get a gallon of gas this way than to get it by drilling a hole, and it's already liquid for us. The Earth already made it into liquid over some millions of years. Now we have to take this material and turn it and squeeze the liquid out of it at high temperature. Right, so the level of destruction is much more vast. So that's really important as planners and designers for us to know, right? We may just be at the beginning of an era of climate change. We've seen this in the last 16 years. Anyone see this map before? The U.S., it's Arbor Day put out their kind of new version of the hardiness zone map of what the average annual lows are. And look at zones. The zones just move northward. Look at Vermont. Used to have zone 3, right? Dark purple there. And a lot of zone 4. Vermont was mostly zone 4 and then a little zone 5. Now keep an eye right on Vermont. No more zone 3, some zone 4, and a lot of zone 5. So as designers, we can say, well, there's some positives of this. I mean, no one would say, oh, we want lots of climate change to happen really rapidly, because that's going to make things more difficult. But we have to look at the upsides. We have to say, all right, what can we take advantage of in this change of conditions? This is the only way to go about it. We have to find out, okay, how is the problem the solution? Which if you've studied permaculture, you know, that's one of the primary principles, right? The problem is the solution. Turn the problem into the solution. It has to be. The solution has to come directly from the problem. So things are getting warmer. Well, that means we can plant a lot more species than we used to be able to. It's not necessarily getting warmer in a reliable way. That's the hard part. That's the challenging part. As Amory Lovins used the term, it's more like global weirding than global warming. Global warming is pretty easy. That's just things are warming up. But it's not quite that simple. So getting into some solutions here, as we zoom forward, we'll get right into our whole systems research farm site in the Mad River Valley towards the last half of this presentation. But here is a pretty phenomenal piece of farming infrastructure. Someone brought up windbreaks before. Look at all these windbreaks, right? And look at all these cropping systems. So this is a commercial scale farm that's not losing soil. I mean, compare this photo to the one we looked at earlier of Iceland and New Zealand. This is in New Zealand, completely differently. It's really a different system what's going on here. So what's happening here? We saw before we're losing soil. The wind's blowing through. The water's washing through. There's just bedrock is being exposed. We're losing value. What's happening here? How are we dealing with water? What's happening with water here? It's being retained, right? In plants, it's probably being slowed down as it flows from the uphill on the right side. It's hitting all these plants. It's hitting these roots. It's being infiltrated, right? It's going into the plants. There's leaf fall from all of this matter, right? So there's deposition happening and soil building that way. Hopefully there's composting happening in this system. And there's a ton of value being derived from the system. These are all edible crops in between the windbreaks here. And I think some of the windbreaks are also edible shrubs, berry yields and fruit tree yields. Because you can make fruit trees into hedges like this. It's really neat. You can make edible, your windbreaks can be a crop in of themselves. Yeah, it's really, really a fantastic example. And now, in areas, some people have seen this and said, well, that looks like Europe. That's not too coincidental. It's really neat because people in certain parts of Europe have managed to figure out how to do agriculture for thousands of years because they've had to stay there. They haven't just been able to pick up and go like we did in Vermont. When we did agriculture here, we just picked up and left. We went to the Midwest. Now we haven't really been agricultural peoples since then. So if we need to become agricultural peoples again, we'll have to figure out how to stay. And that's really the design challenge, right, is how to stay. Wendell Berry talks a lot about that. We need to figure out how to stay. How do we stay here in a successful way? Here's another example of what I think we can call intergenerational value systems. I like to call them intergenerational food systems, right? So these are nut trees. This is actually an arboretum that was planted not really for its food values, although it's offering a lot of food values, beech and hickory and chestnut and oak and walnut. That, cropping systems, essentially you can think of these trees as a food plant. We don't usually think of trees that way, but they are, and they've been worked with that way for millennia, that live beyond the life cycle of one generation or one human being or, even 2-3 generations. And then you have real value development, and that's really what we're really excited about, what kind of value we can create across generations. When we see the most durable value creation happening in societies and what I would think of as true wealth, it's usually done across generations. It's not created, it's not, that's .com, create a whole bunch of wealth seemingly in a year and then, the bubble bursts. It's a long-term process. And certainly we know that's true ecologically as well, not just socially. So this is a soil building system. This is an agriculture, if you will, that isn't bare soil. You don't have to till these systems, right? You don't need the plow. You don't need to turn up the earth. Even in very difficult landscapes, people have figured out how to do this. Any guess what region of the world this might be from? Yeah, Mediterranean, right. I think there's systems like this in South America and across the world, but especially in Europe, where people have had to stay for a long period of time and have actually performed agriculture that continues from 1,000 years ago. So this is like 150% grade. This is more than 45-degree angle that they're farming. That's actually in agriculture. Another form of intergenerational value building. Terraces, all made by hand. This is in Asia, I believe. It's incredible, if left to their own devices and people are staying put and they know they're going to be there and their grandkids are going to be there, what forms people create, how people learn to adapt to their environment to capture their resources and not let them flow downhill, essentially. Not let the water and soil, which is really the holder, the keeper of value, constantly wash downhill, erode, and go into the local waterways and ultimately into the ocean where we can't really get it back. So that's where terraces and paddies and ponds and swales really play a huge role. And you'll see a lot of that when we go out to the Mad River Valley, because that's what it's been a bit of a eureka moment for us in the last couple of years, which is kind of shows how retarded we are as a society in a lot of ways, because it's like, duh, these systems are not new. Creating terraces, paddies, swales, ponds, doing this kind of earthworks has been done for thousands of years. Anywhere where people have inhabited a sloping landscape where they get a lot of water, if they've lived there for more than a couple of generations and done so successfully, that's what they've done, right? So it's kind of like, wow, these things really work. Yeah, they work. You can look around the world and see how well they work. They worked so well that people found it was still worthwhile to do by hand before they had excavators and all this heavy equipment. Now we can make these systems overnight, almost literally. And look at the scale of this. You see the person right in here? So just so we're clear, and we'll make this more clear when we get to Moortown, but why are these systems good? What mechanically, what are these systems doing? I know to some people this might be blatantly obvious, that just a slope can't do as well. What's happening in these systems?
Recharging aquifers.
Right. So, but even more simple than that. Why? why not this, and why this? Excuse me, yeah. Right, so what's happening? The water is slowing down, and then it infiltrates, as someone's saying. It percolates in. So we're stopping the water, or slowing it, at each of these terraces. Now, if we create swales, we're actually doing this. We're actually going lower, deeper. Sorry for the scale on this. But we're creating depositional areas, or patties. We're doing the same. We're actually going down and dropping, and then making a depression, and then doing the same thing again. And we're creating areas where we can actually hold the water. So instead of the water just flying off the slope very quickly, the water's stopping. We're creating residence time where water can infiltrate into the ground. And what, besides the water, what is that? What are we holding on to? The soil, right. Everything, water's the medium for everything, holds everything, the nutrients and soil, yeah. We're trying to increase the ecosystem values, ecosystem services, as well as get a human yield out of it, yeah.
In that last picture, so kind of briefly, like, how is that, other than looking like ridiculously beautiful, like how are those pools working? Like,
right.
You know, do you just plant and then it grows, or?
Yeah, this is all paddy rice. Yeah. But people in these terraces I'm showing, they're doing a lot of different things. They're doing rice mostly, but this may be like annual. This is probably rice too, but some of these paddies are growing like terrestrial crops. Like some of these aren't paddies. You see, these are drier, but they're still catching the water. Here, can anyone see the rice? Do you see all the rice plants? They're tiny. Yeah, that's good enough quality to see. So, you know, those are all in rice. So they're just pools, very shallow basins, filled with an annual crop that's planted annually and harvested annually, and replanted. And the nutrients, in these systems, and you'll see this when we go out to the Mad River Valley, they're fertigated. They will provide, usually they'll have animals uphill and animals in the paddy, so nutrients are provided to the system, so they're fertilized that way. As well as the rain itself has a lot of fertility in it. Yeah.
I feel like you have to have a ridiculous amount of rain to fill all that up. You put any like liners down when you're
Yeah. Yeah, it all depends. So a lot of these systems, and this is what we're really researching and we're at the kind of leading edge of in this part of the world where we haven't made paddies. We don't have examples of these systems in Vermont. And some have said, oh, well, we don't have the monsoons. You can't do that. The monsoons are what fills these. Well, that's partly true, but we have ponds and we can make ponds and fill. We come out of the winter, swinging with plenty of water. So we come out of the winter and we can have full ponds that then we drain and feed the paddies with. So that's what we're focused on. We're using ponds to irrigate and fertilize, to fertigate these paddies. So the ponds are like your big storage, and the paddies are like your garden that you're watering. Yeah, we use just like polytubing, and we just gravity feed from ponds to paddies. But there's a lot of mechanics. We'll get into it when we go out to Moortown. But yeah, you want a pretty good clay soil. You want to create a pan that holds water pretty well. And even then, you will infiltrate some. And one of my paddies, it infiltrates a little more than is ideal. It tends to dry up. I have to feed it water a bit, and one of them holds water really well. But over time, even sandy soil will start to hold water better. Just from the biological action, it's called puddling it in. It starts to hold water really well. So when we see these even in really cold climates, this is northern Japan. Full-on snowy climate, like a zone 4 type of climate where they've done these systems. But that's the only example of a true climate analog to this place where these systems are done that I know of. And Korea as well, probably. Yeah.
Have you done any work with these and make them into kind of living machines? I know there was an example of John Project where he kind of guided water through rice paddies and it kind of fertilized it and it came out with clean water.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, they all are doing that. That's the neat thing. They're all filtering nutrients out. We're feeding in manure water from ducks mostly, and our chicken bedding from raising chickens or whatever it is that we're raising animal-wise, we'll dump into the water upstream of the paddy, and then those nutrients are taken up by the rice. So it's all like phytoremediation in that way. So yeah, you're improving water quality. It's a wetland. It's just an edible wetland system. It's all value if you think about it. And weather, climatologists are starting to point this out. Rain has a ton of fertility in it. It has more now than ever before because of all our nitrogen pollution. So there's a lot more nitrogen in the atmosphere than there used to be. So the rain actually washes some out. And so rain, it's not just psychological why you see things green up after rain. It's being fertilized. So if you think about it this way, if you had just a stream of compost flowing through your landscape, would you just be like, oh, that's cool, I'm just going to let the compost run through? You'd say, no way, this is valuable. I'm going to stop, I'm going to dam it up, I'm going to slow it down, I'm going to start spreading it out on my site and trying to extract the value from it before it's just gone off-site. Water's just as valuable as compost. It's just as rich. Actually, it's probably even more valuable. So it's pretty crazy to just shunt it off our landscapes. We know that. We have to undo a lot of civil engineering, though, because they love to just get it away. Put it into a pipe and get it out of here, right? Not a very good way to get a lot of value out of it. It's a good way to just keep a lot of pollutants in it and send the problem somewhere else. So getting into some of the other systems, I always start with water because it's the basis of how we use our systems anywhere in the world, especially here. But re-inhabiting this place, which is a suburban house that I bought 8 years ago, and taking this lawn, which isn't much of a useful crop, into things we can eat: sunflowers, amaranth, winter squashes. Again, value creation. And I'll just hit on some of this all over the site. We had to start with a lot of logging because we had a lot of white pine dominating our site right south of the house, so it was casting shade on the house in the middle of the winter. Not a good thing. So we started harvesting trees and turning them into building materials for different, barns and sheds and projects that we needed to do on the site to build up the infrastructure side of the site. This is a photo last year of the site. You see all the water systems here? This is actually a good example. These are all on contour swales. You see these? Is that coming through? Yeah. Here's more. These are planted with currants and gooseberries, elderberries. This is now their swales in here. We did during a permaculture course a few weeks ago. That's where all the pine was in this zone. This will become clear when you see it in person. But here's more on contour swales planted in seaberry and hazelnut. And then here's vegetable gardens on terraces here. Here's my office. And then 2 large ponds and a small pond way at the bottom. See that one way down there? Right down there. And then rice paddies and small pools. So all this is water being captured as it flows across the site. And the amazing thing in that tropical storm we just had, was everyone up here for that? You guys are all back in Vermont, right? So this bottom pond here was 3 feet low. It was 3 feet from being full. It's full in this picture. It was 3 feet down because we're at the end of the dry season. When that storm came, when it started raining a few weeks, 2 weeks before Irene, we had a month almost of no rain. It's our dry season. It always happens this time of year. And then all this water started coming. So we entered the dry season 3 feet down, which normally think of a pond being kind of not full as being not so good, right? It doesn't look as good. There's some bare slides. Well, what can it do that a full pond can't do? Yeah, it can absorb that shock. It can act like a battery that you need to put an excess of electricity into. So the first 4 out of 6 inches of rain that landed on our site didn't even leave the site. They just filled the bottom pond. So then the bottom pond only started overflowing this way down the site after the 4th inch. So we weren't even releasing water into the watershed until the storm was almost, finished up to some extent. So think about that from a flood contribution standpoint, right? 4 out of the 6 inches on this site were just completely just absorbed, like taking that hit. It's a shock absorber to have ponds and paddies and swales like this. So then we only, let's say, started overflowing 2 inches. So those 2 inches went to the river. Whereas most landscapes, all 6 inches, most of it, maybe the first 1/4 inch is infiltrated, depending on how good the soil is and what people are doing and how things are laid out. And 95% of that storm is shunted right off the landscape. 100% of it if you're in an urban area, right? Impermeable surfaces, and it all goes into the watershed. Where my house is, or my studio, this pond is lined with plastic, actually, unlike all our other ponds and paddies. So this berm and this land stays dry. So it's not being saturated from that pond. Because then all that water, all that land, like you're saying, could slump. Bad landslide. Yeah, absolutely.
So you consider all this question for your
Yeah, you have to consider that, absolutely, yeah.
So the ones below
Yeah, but they still shouldn't because the way they're built, the water, your soils are only saturated for a small area because there's a lot of clay in these soils. But it's something you have to consider. Yeah.
How'd your neighbors hold up in comparison to your site?
Yeah.
What was like the visual difference? If there
Well,
was any?
there was mostly in how people manage their roads. I mean, most even places in lawn shouldn't experience erosion in a storm like we got. We only got 6 inches in Moortown. It's really not that much water. You know, if something's just vegetated, it's not going to erode really. But you're not absorbing anything. All that water is just leaving. It's going into the river. Whereas we absorbed a lot. We absorbed most of the storm. So, but obviously down in the river bottom where it flooded, you know, they're really wrecked. And up on the slope, we're okay. I had a little erosion on my driveway, but not much. It's all gravel I can reclaim and patch. So one other way of cultivating value, what's happening here? Anyone recognize these mushrooms? Close? Shiitake, right? So here's a way of us, we can't eat wood directly, but we can eat mushrooms, and they eat wood. And we have a lot of wood in Vermont. So again, it's all, you want to start thinking in a pattern of what are our resources, how do we cultivate value and garner value of those resources over as potently as possible over as long a period of time as possible. So fungi is a big one because we have tons of woody debris in this landscape. This part of the world we have almost an excess of woody debris. Our landscape constantly wants to create woody debris, and most of that's pretty low value, like slash, right? When we log, cut the branches, that's pretty low value biological material. But here's a way of turning it into high value, potent value. It's medicinal. It's 30% protein, shiitake mushroom. So we're going from relatively low value, this stuff wasn't even good enough to be firewood most of the time, to high value, high potency materials. Here's shiitake we dry for the winter. Is another example of one of those principles, right? Extending it over time. Because we can't eat this many mushrooms at once. So we need to dry them, store them across the winter months when we have 6 months, 8 months of not being able to grow shiitake. There's another kind called wine cap that we also grow on the site. Another kind, anyone recognize this? Oyster, yeah. Grows in a different type of wood, poplar.
It's got a puffball.
Oh, yeah.
About this big,
Uh-huh.
which is huge to try
Yeah.
to eat as just a couple people.
Yeah.
So can we dry the puffball?
I don't know about that mushroom. Maybe. There's probably a way.
Yeah.
But
Drier, but.
yeah, I have no experience with puffballs directly. Morels, right. Now we grew this one year. They're not really cultivatable as far as most people think. They never came back after the first year. But this is what we're doing. We're just trying to see what can we cultivate. What can we seed the landscape with and what will come back? What can we partner with, as John Todd puts it? What species can we partner with to inhabit the landscape with that can feed us? Right? That's permaculture. It's not, oh, I'm going to clear this land of everything but bare soil and I'm going to grow this one crop. Right? That's most farming. Permaculture says let's just populate this landscape with a lot of really productive organisms, and what can we have a good synergistic interrelationship with? What can we live in synergy with that can help feed us, build soil, hold our water, keep us healthy, be medicine, be a product we can sell, make a living from, trade. Capturing nutrients is, of course, a big strategy here. So early on, we started connecting with local horse farmers that when we realized they were dumping their horse manure over a bank and just growing a bunch of sumac and poplar with all of this amazingly valuable manure, we said, well, with a little bit of diesel fuel, we can drive over there with my truck and trailer and capture all these nutrients and actually grow food with it. So that became a no-brainer in the beginning of the site to really jumpstart the site because we have very poor soils. The site that I live on lost most of its soils in the 1800s and early 1900s. It's been cleared, it's just been abused and abandoned, which is really the case for most of Vermont. Most of the world's been abused, but not necessarily abandoned. Vermont's been abused and abandoned. It's been farmed. You walk into the woods, you jump out of a plane over Vermont, chances are you're going to land in what once was a hill farm, mostly growing sheep at one point, or at least cows. And most of those being done pretty poorly, and a lot of the soils that used to be there not being there anymore. It's a testament to how deep Lake Champlain really is. It's really deep. It was deeper before the last 200 years, because that's where the soil's gone. So here we're sheet mulching actually the leach field of the house, which is the most fertile site on most anyone's rural homestead. is their leach field. So good place to grow food. You got to be careful. You got to take it into account what toxins might be there. You can at least grow biomass crops. Another really important nutrient to harvest. What's that? Human urine, right? If you're really serious about growing plants, save your piss. Compost human manure, right? Some of the most important, most valuable nutrients are flowing through us, flowing through our livestock as well every day. So you'd never think of just throwing out, flushing away your valuable sheep manure if you're raising sheep and you're doing it in a smart farm system. But it's easy to do with human beings. This is my friend Chris Eaton. Got a funny look on his face there, but this is a composting toilet we just installed where I live. So saving nutrients right off the bat, no brainer. You got to start by saving your nutrients, not letting them go, just like the water. There's another shot of the pond systems looking downhill. We're looking dead west on our site here. Rice paddies with the pond systems. I'm going to go through some of this pretty fast because you guys are going to see it in person. There are, we've stocked the bottom pond with perch and bluegill, and now we're starting to fish those out, and they're reproducing. So we have kind of a perpetuating population of protein-rich food there. Yeah. This is as we built the first pond, and you can see this isn't like most ponds, right? Most excavators, when they go to build a pond, they get rid of all the rocks. We like the rocks because that's habitat, that's edge. That's how you raise fish really productively, create little areas where big fish can't get, like over here on the left side. So small fish, it's like a nursery for fish. Creating edge, it's a big principle in any living systems development. Your classic make a bowl and simplify it, chuck the boulders all over the edge. You don't create a lot of habitat opportunities for life there, right? If you're trying to create a healthy ecosystem, and a productive ecosystem, we want as many living things at every trophic level as possible. So we're trying to grow the food that the fish we want to eat, right? So we want to grow these organisms called Gammarus and Daphnia and frogs and salamanders and all these smaller animals that can help support the ecosystem. The larger animals, which we eat directly, live off of. It's just like growing soil to grow a crop, same way. So that's farming the ecosystem, not just farming the crop. That's permaculture. Another shot, different shots, angles, different times a year of the site. We've planted sowed a lot of white clover all over the site to build soil because it's a nitrogen fixer. And we'll talk more about that. It's really hard to capture what the swales do, but here's an example after a rainstorm. Can you see how they're holding water? So that's right. This is straight downhill. The way my cursor is moving this way, and this is all cross slope this way. So that pattern, a cross slope pattern, is gonna. If you work in ecological design with land, in any way, shape, or form, that's got to be embedded in your mind across the slope. Luckily, contour lines on a map are that form. So take those into account in your planning. We'll get into detail working with that. Here are terraces we made last year, and you can see we mounded up soil to plant potatoes. And again, if we're going to do it, might as well do it across contour, right? Slow the water flow. And these all grew potatoes this year. We just harvested, we're in the midst of harvesting about 6 wheelbarrow loads of potatoes from those terraces. Here's my office studio, where me and the folks at Whole Systems Design work, and our workshop down below. All made from wood from the land for the most part, or local wood. So all that's pine. The pines we cut down, we milled on site with a portable bandsaw mill, and turned into this building. I'll click through a few slides on the infrastructure, but I want to get through this last part. It's been an hour, and I want to have time for questions and discussion if there is, and then we'll get to site next week. A conscious decision to make the system last a long period of time if you're making a built system, right? Because built systems aren't regenerative for the most part. We haven't really figured out how to make a regenerative building. A building that really does what a tree does, right? Like makes oxygen, makes habitat for other living things. For the most part, our best buildings just do less harm, right? This building I saw had a LEED green whatever sticker on the way in, right? It's not making anything of value here. I mean, we have space to hang out, dry space, that's valuable. But ecologically, it's maybe just doing less damage. But it's still impermeable surface. It's not producing oxygen. It's not really producing a lot of wildlife habitat, if any. So for the most part, the best we've learned how to do with buildings is do less bad. That's not great. That's why I like working with plants and living systems, because we actually do good. But so we take the standpoint, if we're going to make a building, let's make it, the best thing we can do is make it last a really long time. So that's why we put a slate roof on this building. And that's why a lot of the details of what we build are the way they are, and we'll see them when we get to the Mad River Valley. Here's a barn that I built with a friend last year, which we're still finishing. It's in the winter. This is a drawing of the barn, and then this is what these bents look like, timber framing. So again, durability strategy, right? Building with quality. This is where quality comes in as playing a role in regeneration and sustainability. It's often not talked about. Like we don't usually talk about craftsmanship in the world of regeneration and sustainability, but it's crucial when it comes to built infrastructure. It's really all about craftsmanship, and if you look at places where people have inhabited, just like those terrace systems, they're built environments, if they've been there for hundreds and thousands of years, tend to be really high quality as well. Some of the other strategies, we're experimenting with lots of land use strategies at the site. I'll mention more of them when we're out there, but we're fertilizing with foliar feeds. That's what's happening here. We're even messing around with fire as a management tool, which isn't really utilized in this part of the world often, because there's not a lot of times a year you can actually even burn anything in terms of the sod. But when you can, it can actually be really regenerative in terms of getting other nitrogen-fixing plants as part of your pasture mix that are better for the animals and better for the soil. We burn on contour slash down to charcoal basically, and then inoculate it, turn it into biochar. Has anyone heard of biochar? We'll talk a bit about it. Really exciting field emerging right now, although it's probably very old in terms of its practice. Some season extension, solar hot water, just some infrastructure examples there. Finally got my wood, finally making hot water with a wood stove, like in a systematic way, which I've been designing since college, and finally got around to doing it, and this is the final design. And it's working better than I thought it would. It's really quite amazing. No pump, just total wood-powered building, that studio. Cordwood, I traded a lot of the pine we logged recently for hardwood cordwood because it sticks around a long period of time. And we know, unless all of a sudden our climate shifts to being like North Carolina or something, we'll need to keep ourselves warm over the winter. Animal systems, big part of what we're doing. We'll get into those out in the valley. We raised 20 meat birds this year. That's them, with my dog Akira watching over them. She does a good job of hanging out with all the animals. That's a goat we raised last year, and some sheep. They're just giving Akira a lot of hard time there, watching her. So the dog is a big part of the system. I partly throw these photos in because she's so damn cute, and I'm totally in love with her. But she actually keeps these ducks alive. She keeps the hawks away and the birds of prey, and will just stave off coyotes and foxes and stuff coming in. Just her presence, really. So when raising animals, of course, predation is a big issue. So she's a big part of that. She likes to just hang out and look really beautiful too. But because the ducks definitely can get eaten pretty easily out in the woods. So these are the ducks that fertilize the rice. We'll see that when we're out there. This is the first round of ducks we raised like 3 years ago, and now we're on our second round. They're really crazy. I mean, they just talk all day. They're not ever quiet. Even in the middle of the night, they'll start quacking in their sleep, it seems like. I don't know why they're in a bucket there, but that's just, they happen to jump in one day. Here they are one day, cruising down towards the rice. One of the goats and sheep, they got along pretty well. Bees, we haven't had a lot of success with bees lately, but we're making another attempt with some new folks at the property. There's a clover we spread everywhere. We're always planting trees, usually with groups, student groups from UVM, from other colleges come and visit. This is, I think, a group from Yestermile, actually, planting on contour. We're dealing with some pest challenges with growing plums in particular. We won't get into that right now. Japanese beetles, those are actually pretty easy to deal with. We have a nursery on site that we plant every year, we add to every year. This is 50 black locust trees. You can hold them in one hand when you get them bare root and then plant them out. And this is what they look like after 1 year. They get about this big. And then in 5 years, you got full-on fence posts you can harvest. In 10 years, you have full millable timber. They grow as fast as any tree, but they're as hard as white oak, excuse me. Amazing tree. And they're edible. This is their flowers. Really, really important species to work with. We'll talk a lot about black locust. Bur oak as well is a fast-growing nut tree, but nothing like black locust. But it does have a nut yield. And then on the production end, we just try to grow as high a biodiversity of potent food crops as possible. Being fed is one thing, but maintaining our health in an age of increasing toxicity, where we're constantly dumping more and more chemicals that we don't know much about into our atmosphere globally. We all share this very thin atmosphere across the world. I think we're coming to a realization that being fed may be the easy part, staying healthy may be the difficult part. 1 in every 2 people have cancer now, I think it is, in certain parts of the world. Some may say, oh, that's just because we're living longer. I don't think it's that simple, unfortunately. It's one big chemistry experiment, all of the synthetic chemicals we're making. All of the electromagnetic rays we're just living in now all of a sudden in a short period of time. We haven't had time to adapt to these systems. So we take the approach, well, let's at least feed ourselves the highest quality, most potent foods possible. In addition to staple crops like potatoes, I'm talking about plants like this: seaberry, aronia, autumn olive, blackberry, raspberry, cranberry, elderberry, mushroom, different fungi. Foods that are medicine as well, that are really, really potent medicines. And those are usually, oftentimes, fruits that are very high in anthocyanins and bioflavonoids, that are very high in pigments, especially purple pigments. Elderberry, aronia, blackberry, those are all, they look black, but they're actually purple pigments, and those are very, very high in antioxidants, which is important to keep ourselves healthy. Yeah.
How have you gone about funding a lot of this stuff? Is there a lot of grants and?
Yeah, we haven't had time to actually write any grants because we're just busy working on the site. It's really the business that's just funded it. It hasn't been very expensive. Plants, you can make plants yourselves, but at times it's been expensive. We just have funded it with the business because we want to do it anyways, whether someone's going to help us or not. We're going to do it for my own health and those of the people that live there, and security and enjoyment and learning. But a lot of it is incredibly researchable. We're trying to figure out all the things that we don't know about. So we've tried to connect with people who are writing grants, and we've started to write some grants through other people, especially for the rice and some other experiments. Here's Schisandra berry, very powerful in the Chinese pharmacopoeia. It's been regarded as a medicinal plant for thousands of years. Very important food and medicine plant. Plums, blackberry, seaberry, elderberry. Some are more familiar. We make those into smoothies all winter to stay healthy. If you're good about doing this, I basically, when I've been good about this, I don't get sick. I don't get the flu or a cold. You keep it away. You can really keep yourself pretty healthy, as long as you're also getting a lot of exercise and thinking good thoughts and things like that. But hazelnut, anyone ever see these growing around here? They're common. They're a native plant, but we grow selective varieties that are really big, and we're harvesting them right now, actually. Duck eggs, more fungi, elderberry, nutrient density. That's what it looks like. So it's not just the staples we're used to. That's important, but we need it's not just staying fed, it's staying healthy that I think is becoming a big challenge. These are oyster mushrooms, which you saw before, blueberry, gumi, currant, raspberry, gooseberry, Korean bush cherry. All these fruits we never knew we could grow here, right? We're just trying them, and most of them so far are successful. So this is the good news of a lot of where we're at, right, in the world. We just haven't figured out much. We're pretty retarded as a society. And that's great, because if we have been trying all sorts of stuff, we've been trying to really figuring out and being really, really smart, and we're still stuck in this 5th grade extinction and, screwing up our waterways, and, if our ecosystems were as toxic as they are, we're still as toxic as they are today, and we were really doing a good job, well, that would be a pretty grim situation. But to me, that's the good news. We've been doing a really poor job. We've been not very smart with our design. So we can do a lot better, and that's the exciting thing. We don't know what we're doing yet. We're just figuring out what's possible, and that's what we're trying to do out at the Whole Systems Design Research Farm. Growing amaranth as a staple crop, seaberry, these are some of our favorite ones. We're constantly propagating plants. This is grafting we do in the spring. That's a top working a tree. That's pear growing on hawthorn. They're compatible. Beautiful plum blossoms this spring. This is actually making, there's a few slides I'll end with where we're making the rice patties. So this is how we went about it 2 years ago. These are the patties after construction. Seeding the rice, starting it up in cold frames, planting it, just like growing a vegetable, like growing an onion.
You slowly flood it.
Yeah, in the beginning, you slowly
So you
flood it.
can fill it over.
Yeah, you don't want to drown it early on.
It up as it grows.
That's the idea, but we're messing around with a lot of different approaches to that. But generally, that's what we're doing. There it is, mid-season. This is planting it this year. This is the second year in the patties. Other group projects, this is inoculating mushroom logs. That's what the rice looks like when it's growing. Gets bigger, starting to mature. Look at that. That looks like a little bit of Southeast Asia there, but it's Vermont. That's when it's almost ready for harvest. There it is, mature rice with some still maturing there. And then once it's harvested and dry, hung up, and then we process it. I found this dehuller in a barn in Vermont, which is really weird because rice dehullers don't exist in Vermont, but there happened to be one in this barn. And then that's what it looks like before it's dehulled, and that's what it looks like after.
Have you harvested yet?
Not yet this year, but I lost a lot of my crop due to birds. Luckily, I still have plenty from last year for plant again, my seed crop, but the birds didn't touch it last year. They learned it's there. So that's why we're doing it now. You know, it's practice time. In fact, I can go buy a ridiculous amount of rice for next to nothing at the store. So it's a good time to practice. So I'll end on this note just mentioning we get into the details of all this stuff in our permaculture design course. We just had our first one end a few weeks ago, and we'll do one, at least 2 next year. And there's already people signing up for it. This one filled, so we're going to keep running them. So I'll end on that note, and we'll open it for discussion, and we'll get out to the site starting next week.